everybody's willing, we don't have a ton on our agenda today. Item 5.1 is the Community and Housing Organization Subcommittee, which I think will be a good discussion. I'm actually going to be recusing myself from the discussion, so I'll introduce it and answer questions, but then I'm going to recuse myself. So I was going to ask if in the agenda we could move that to the end, because there's only a couple of small items after it, so there's not really much point me like leaving and then waiting around and then coming back just for a few small items. So if we could just move, essentially, move those small items up, and we'll put 5.1 as the last item, and then when I'm out, I'm out. So of course I can be available if for some reason you want me to come back. I can make sure I'm near my phone. So yeah, is there any other proposed changes to the agenda? No. So if everybody's in favor of the modified agenda,
as amended,
unanimously, yep. Okay, as amended. Thank you. Okay, and then adoption of the minutes. So that's in our agenda package. Did anybody have any questions or comments about the minutes from I'm looking back, is it July 5th was our last meeting? Yeah, okay. I'm sure I did look at these at the time. I didn't get a chance to look at them this past week. So, okay, so sorry, I didn't see no comments, no questions. Okay, everybody unanimously approve the adoption of the minutes. Okay, great. Public comments, Steph, I don't think we have anybody. Nope. Okay, moving right along. 4.1, interim housing needs report, initial findings, over to Daniel.
Thanks, Robin. I'm going to share with you this one. All right, so I have for the committee what I presented to council on Monday, which is essentially data for an interim housing needs report on Bowen Island. So let me find the right square to advance. All right. So last fall, the province adopted new legislation, Bill 44, which requires local governments to complete what's called an interim housing needs report by January 1st, 2025, which needs to include 5-year and 20-year number of housing units needed. It's like a housing projection. And then municipalities, so including Bowen, are then tasked to update our OCPs and our zoning bylaws by December 31st, 2025 to accommodate the identified number of housing units. And in June, the province came out with the housing needs report methods. And essentially that 20-year projected housing need consists of 5 different housing calculations: households in extreme core housing need, housing for individuals experiencing homelessness, for suppressed households, for anticipated household growth, for required to increase rental vacancy, and then what they're calling a demand buffer. And these numbers end up being they're sort of a blending of like local government housing needs, so like the Bowen Island housing needs, and then what's calculated as like essentially our share of Metro Vancouver housing need. So the province trying to say in their methodology that it's not enough for a local government to say we're meeting the needs of our population here on Bowen, but the BC is saying, regions are interconnected, and it's not enough for a community to say, this is enough for our people here. This is our housing need, because essentially they're saying it's like there's a share of housing in the region. So for example, the number B, where it's number of housing units for individuals experiencing homelessness, it's essentially a share of regional homelessness need. And it's saying that due to either like choices by municipalities to fund shelter beds or choices by provincial governments where to fund shelter beds, that when you look at like homelessness counts based on shelter beds in municipalities, you end up with higher counts of homelessness in places that have shelter beds. And so the methodology is saying that's not a fair way to look at it. It's saying that, those people could be housed throughout the region and not just where like historically shelter beds have been funded. Another one that, so some of them are quite interesting. So suppressed households is essentially looking at what is the number of individuals who would form households in 2006 and how has that number changed now? So it's saying like if you are in a community that has constrained housing need, one of the effects you'll see is like people in their, for example, in their 20s and 30s are less likely to form their own households. They're more likely to have roommates. They're more likely to still live with their parents. And so they want you to look back at 2006, which is the oldest that data goes back to, and say, if at that point you had a higher rate of people in their 20s forming their own households, you've now actually suppressed that potential housing need. What else? And then the demand buffer, essentially they calculate per local government, essentially saying like if your housing prices are inflated, there's an additional housing demand in the municipality. And so you need to sort of have this additional demand that's out there that's saying like because there's additional demand for in your community. So these 6 numbers, and MetroBank, all based on publicly available data. So it's all quite like straightforward to calculate. And Metro Vancouver Housing undertook this work for Bowen Island and for a number of other jurisdictions in Metro Vancouver. And so they've provided us with the calculation for the total 20-year housing need. So what it says on Bowen is total new units needed over 20 years is 1,393 additional housing units. And then the 5-year, I don't have in the slide, it's in the report, but essentially it's most of the numbers are divided by 4. Some of them are divided by 2. So essentially it's saying it's not enough to say that if there's need for people experiencing homelessness, it's not enough to say, well, we'll provide that housing in 20 years. They're like, no, it needs to be on a more accelerated timeline. Yeah, so it feels like quite a, I think when I saw the number, I was like, oh, that seems like quite a large number. So Bowen has about 1,700 occupied households currently, and about 2,200 dwellings. Yeah, give or take. One of the things that this projection is saying is not that like Bowen has to produce 1,393 housing units in 20 years, but it's saying that our OCP and our zoning has to provide that capacity. The other thing needs to be included in a housing needs report is 2 statements. So we need to include a statement about the need for housing near transportation infrastructure. So I drafted something that's in the report that essentially says we recognize that this is important. I pulled a policy in our OCP that seeks housing to be near walking distance of transit, and then language from our Bowen's climate action strategy about reducing the needs for transportation, giving priority to new residential development in or near Snug Cove. So I'm happy to discuss with the committee this one. And then the second one too is wanting to include a statement about actions taken to reduce housing needs since the last housing needs report. So that was in 2020. And so I basically flagged 3 things. I flagged the housing action plan in our housing accelerator fund, our bylaw which we just adopted, so secondary suites and detached secondary suites on all residential properties on Bowen, and the agreement to lease council direction from July about agreement to lease the Birch or Lookout project on 1033 Miller. So there may be more that we want to include. I was just trying to flag some of primarily the recent stuff. So it says since 2020, but really this was obviously, I was flagging 2024 actions or 2020, late 2023. And then, so then what we did with the housing needs report numbers is trying to look at, okay, what is the capacity in our current OCP? Do we need to include changes in the OCP immediately by that December deadline? And so when we calculated it, we came up with that based on BC assessment data, there's currently 287 vacant residential properties on Bowen. And then we looked at existing comprehensive development zones that have additional capacity, and we found 351 additional units that could be produced in comprehensive development zones. Primarily, that's Grafton Lake and Cowan Point. And then we did some analysis looking at where could lots be created through subdivision if the lots were designated at their OCP levels. And we found 685 additional lots that could be created through subdivision if those lots were like zoned the same as their OCP designation. And then through conversation with the province, we were asking, well, each of those lots that could be created could produce 2 units of housing. So they could produce a house and a detached secondary suite or a attached secondary suite. So we're essentially saying, like, is that fair for us then to count those as 2 units of housing? And the province said, yes, that's a fair way to calculate it, that each of those could have 2 units of housing. So based on that, we'd found 2008 units of housing could be built under Bowen's 2011 OCP. So like theoretical capacity within the OCP. We haven't yet done the work of determining capacity of the land use bylaw, so essentially we'd be doing a similar analysis. And my anticipation would be, those first 2 numbers won't change. So the 287 and the 351, so like 600 units. But probably there's significantly fewer of that last category of properties that could be subdivided. So we may be required to make changes to the land use bylaw prior to December 31st, 2025. But we don't know yet what extent those changes are. And then the other thing I'll say, and this is more for like OCP review process, but I'm sure the Housing Advisory Committee will be involved in some stage, is like this analysis is saying, okay, Bowen is not required to make changes to increase the number of units that are in the OCP because of Bill 44. But that's not to say that through the OCP process, that may be something that would come out of the OCP process. It's also not to say that like this calculates just the sheer units of housing that could be created. And I think it's potential. And yeah, that through the OCP review process, that the determination is like that this form of housing doesn't meet all of those needs that people in Bowen have, right? This would say, okay, a lot of our housing would be in the form of 5 or 10 acre lots that are created to be a single family house in a detached secondary suite. And that would, by just numbers, would meet the number of units that are required in our projection. But it's possible the OCP review process may end up with an OCP that says, okay, but that we don't feel that will actually meet the needs of people in Bowen, that, in our experience, that those aren't actually developed as housing that is what we want, and instead we want to see changes. We just wouldn't be able to reduce the capacity in our OCP, so we're below that threshold of units to be created. So that's what I had to present. I'll stop sharing maybe and open for discussion or questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Daniel. I have one quick question, and then I'll go out to the group to see if there's. I don't know if you remember this off the top of your head. I was just wondering, how does the Housing Accelerator Fund fit in with this as well? I can't remember those numbers. We're committed or hopeful to build X number of units by some year.
I think it's 100. I don't remember that 140 or 160 within 3 years. Or
okay,
we have to issue building permits for that number within 3 years. Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious where that fit in. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I'll open it up. Has anybody got any comments or questions or anything?
I have a question.
I'll go to, so I've got Nigel and then Ron. So Nigel, go ahead.
Daniel, I was just curious if there are any Islands Trust exemptions that can be relied on. I like that we're, I guess, ahead of the curve on the housing needs report numbers. But when I look at that number, if it was all built out, it brings up concerns about just the resource constraints of Bowen, in particular water. And I think that's kind of unique to the Islands Trust communities. And I was just curious if if there's any exemption we can rely on.
Yeah, so in the legislation, right, local governments are required to do the housing needs report. So that includes the Islands Trust as a local government. But then municipalities are required to make the changes. So Bowen as a municipality is required to do the changes, whereas the other islands are not.
I don't know what do the changes is.
Yeah, so there's not an exemption. I think so. I guess a couple ways to answer that. One is council had asked the ministry, to what extent Bowen was considered when making these changes, and the ministry responded. That was on our last council agenda, and I'll just share the link to that in here. And essentially said, there are a wide range of planning contexts across BC local governments. Bowen is unique among municipalities given the relationship with the Islands Trust. As Bowen works to implement the new requirements and tools under Bill 44 and other recent legislation, please feel free to continue to reach out to my team as questions arise. That's the summary. Okay. So, they considered it. I mean, I think, we definitely, when Bill 44 was adopted and as the regulations have come out, we've been in conversations with the province about Bowen and about our status and how this would work within, given that we are required to comply with the Islands Trust Act, as well as, Bill 44 and changes to the Local Government Act and how those work together. I think if our analysis had come back and we'd said, we need to add 1,000 units of housing to the OCP by end of December, to what extent we would be accelerating like those conversations with the province to say, we have concerns about implementing this because of conflict with the Islands Trust Act. And it may be that that is a similar conversation that would happen with the land use bylaw amendments. So yeah, I mean, the Bill 44 is a fairly like blunt instrument. It's maybe brought about because of like historic, I don't know, like, yeah, history of land use planning in BC and other jurisdictions of local governments creating roadblocks to housing and saying that that's not, that hasn't necessarily served everyone well. But yeah, through the changes to land use bylaw, that is something that we're thinking about, is like carrying capacity and how to ensure that if we're zoning for places for additional units without the need for rezonings, how do we still capture ability to monitor things like carrying capacity?
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. I see Allison's hand up. Is it in response to this discussion? Because Ron was next with his question. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, it's the same. But you're not going to get a building permit if you can't show adequate water or ability to provide sewer or septic on your lot and that sort of thing. So, and I know most of the other municipalities have all been saying, yes, we want to be able to build these things, but we don't have the infrastructure in place, sewer and water to necessarily, sewer especially, necessarily to do it. So I think that's a conversation that's still on the go.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to go to Ron in a sec, but I did want to just say, Daniel, could you remind, especially for folks watching, Bill 44, that's the one that essentially kind of said, hey, you have to build this number of housing that was imposed on municipalities.
That's one that did like all the changes. So we have to do secondary suites. Bigger municipalities have to do this small scale multi-unit housing, and it says we have to do housing needs report, and we have to make the changes in the OCP and the land use bylaw.
Right. And that's the one, so cities like Vancouver and other places can build like 8 units now on a big single family lot, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And then there's a separate one that was like the transit oriented development stuff where you have to designate for even greater levels of density. Is a separate, I forget which number that bill is.
Yeah. Okay. Ron, thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
Well, I have, I guess, exactly the same concerns about Nigel, and I would say that Bill 44 is not a blunt instrument. It's a terribly one-sided instrument. It prescribes the necessity to provide for housing needs without, as far as I can see, any regard whatsoever of the for the island's carrying capacity, of which I agree that water is the most obvious one. I think I also question the methodology, which includes suppressed housing. Now, I agree that that's something to be considered. That there are couples that would like to raise families, and there are couch surfers who would like to have their own place. And in that sense, suppressed housing is a real thing that should be considered. However, if we conform to this over the next 20 years, by then the young couple's children will themselves becoming of childbearing age. And so the suppressed housing number won't go down, it'll just go up exponentially. That's all.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And one of the things that interests me about this is like they're sort of forcing everybody to look ahead 20 years. Like you can't just keep kind of looking in these small increments. So, I mean, I think OCPs generally did that, but it's interesting to kind of really put some hard numbers to it. Does anybody else have comments? Who haven't we heard from? Tim or Greg or any thoughts? Greg? No, you're good. Okay, Tim, any comments? I guess you've seen this at council, so you've probably. Anything to add? No?
Yeah, I asked my questions at council, so I think I'm all good. Thanks.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think my only comments maybe to add on well, no, I'm just going to reiterate what Daniel had said. And my biggest thing that I would say is this will be going to the OCP review group. And just as Daniel said, I think the biggest thing I'd be hoping they would recognize is the type of housing and the different options, because as you say, basically it's single family housing with maybe a detached suite, maybe a suite in the house, but having those different kinds of forms of housing is going to be so important to meet those needs. So that would be what I'd be looking for. I see Allison's hand up, but maybe Daniel, I'll come back to you in a moment to ask what you need from us, what you'd like, if there's anything we can give you before we wrap up. But Allison, go ahead.
Well, I guess it's just thinking back to when we did the initial secondary suites that people were allowed to build in their houses. There was this horrible fear, and every time we do a subdivision or a rezoning, that all of a sudden, you know, on day one, we're going to have 100 new houses. I don't know how many secondary suites we actually have, but it's nowhere near what everybody was, you know, being so fearful. I mean, it's still got to get built, and that's going to be the individual lot owner's choice. They've just made it simpler for people to do it and the ability to do it. But, you know, we haven't had a huge take up on detached secondary suites or even in-house secondary suites. So, you know, we can plan for it, but people are still going to have to build it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great distinction, and something I made note of, and I'm really glad you mentioned it, Daniel, and brought it again, Allison, is that because when you see the number, you think, oh my gosh, we have to build 1,300 units in the next 20 years, like, but the important thing to note is, no, we don't have to have those built. We have to have the OCP simply, and the zoning has to allow for that to happen. And you're right, Allison, it is going to be up to whoever owns the lots, whoever's developing, to actually fulfill that need still. But that's what it's coming from. Whereas and that's why I wanted to mention the Housing Accelerator Fund, if we can get to that goal, is an obligation to have, as you say, building permits, not quite fully built, but up to the building permits kind of issued. So that's a different one, so different category. But yeah, so Daniel, is there anything other than comments and these thoughts? Is there anything other that you need from us on this item?
So yeah, when I bring this back to council, I'll be bringing those two statements to be in our housing needs report. So one was transportation infrastructure and one was about actions taken. So I don't know if I need it now or if anybody wants to send me comments after as well, if people want more time to think about it.
Could you bring that up on the screen
yeah.
again? Yeah. Does anybody have comments on the transportation one? I feel like the transportation committee will probably comment on that. So jump in if there is, but maybe just bring up the, or we could read again the transportation one.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so it's basically we encourage it near transit, and there's some numbers and metrics there.
It's kind of odd that that this one's required, because it's like it kind of is leading you to say it, right? A statement about the need for housing near transit. So you just have to you have to have a statement that says there's a need for housing near transportation infrastructure. I was kind of a little yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what to say.
And then the next one, which is probably what you might want our comments on. Okay. So maybe I'll just read it out so we all have it here. Bowen's last housing needs report was completed in spring 2020. Actions undertaken since that completion include approval of a housing action plan associated with the Housing Accelerator Fund, adoption of bylaw permitting secondary suites and detached secondary suites on all residential properties on Bowen Island, and an agreement to lease 1033 Miller Road for the Birch Lookout project. So yeah, I guess you'd be looking for if we have any other thoughts, like anything else to add to that, or any comments on these.
Yeah.
The agreement to lease 1033 Miller Road might need a little more explanation.
Sure.
To enable the building of a X
units or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is anybody else around the virtual table here have any thoughts on other stuff we might be missing? I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Councillor Wake has something to say.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just reflecting on what Allison and you, Robin, and Daniel have said, putting this all together, perhaps oversimplifying, the way we're going to have to move forward is building projects, multifamily projects, not waiting for people to do individual units on their lots. That will help, but and in terms of getting it near transit, well, those projects need to be near transit. So I think the future of the solution to our challenge is basically going to be bringing together more multifamily projects, including townhouses, rental and ownership, hopefully, and apartments.
Okay, great. And sorry, Daniel, remind me, where are these statements going? They're
They have
going
to
in
go.
this updated housing needs report.
Yeah, so when I come back to council, I'll bring a document that's like interim housing needs report that will be the 20-year projection, the 5-year projection, these two statements, and we'll have council adopt
Okay.
it, and I'll send to the province and say, here's our interim housing needs report.
And what's the timeline for that? Is it the end of the year or like next month kind of thing? I can't remember.
Let's come back. I need to have it done by January 1st, 2025. And
Okay,
I'd prefer, I was sort of debating because I know, sorry, later in this meeting, we're talking about more housing needs stuff that could come up, but I would kind of
Yeah.
like to just finish this project
Yeah.
and have it
Yeah.
like done. Yeah.
Oh, agreed. Yeah. So yeah, that was going to be my
Mm.
only further comment is
Mhm.
depending on how the discussion goes
Yeah.
in the next half hour, there might be something else to add. But yes, if it's the timeline is, I'd say off the top of my head, this is what I think of. If there's anything else that comes to me or anybody else in the committee, we can certainly send you that. But that would be the only thing to add. And then just depending on the timeline of when you have to submit this, if there is action taken on this next report that we're going to discuss. So, okay, great. Any
Excellent.
final thoughts before we wrap up that section? Nope, seeing none. Okay, so we'll move along. Let me get my agenda back up here. So we're going to skip 5.1, leave that till the end, as we mentioned at the beginning. So we did put this in, and Nigel, I don't know if you have one. We just sort of put this in a bit as a standing item, the Housing Reserve Fund Working Group. Is there any
I'll say something
no
just
update?
briefly. I wanted to thank Daniel for circulating the inclusionary zoning guidance document. What I saw in there is there's just more, it sets out more guidance for the concept of cash in lieu. So I was hoping to connect with Daniel over the next few weeks just to sort of get a little more granular on how that could contribute to the fund. So Daniel, I'll reach out to you after the meeting.
Perfect. And I think Nigel too, tying it to our previous agenda item, really the opportunity, I think, to do inclusionary or look at some form of this will be when we determine capacity in the land use bylaw and we're having to make changes to increase, if we have to make changes to increase capacity to meet Bill 44 requirements,
okay,
we would want to be considering things like inclusionary zoning density bonusing, whatever it may be, to say, okay, well, if this property now can allow this many units, maybe we're requiring a certain percent be affordable or something. Like there's definitely an opportunity for that to be considered through that project. Yeah.
great.
Okay,
Just
yes,
a quick
Allison, go ahead.
question. Daniel, the document that Nigel's referring to,
Yeah.
when did you send that around? I've
When
got so much stuff in my inbox. Yeah.
It was the province put out guidelines. I'll circulate. It's a PDF. I'll just put it in the chat. It was published end of August, so I probably sent it sometime around then. The link is in the chat now for the PDF.
Great, thank you. Okay, thanks, Nigel. The next item, 6.1, Lot 3 of the community lands. So that's my update. So that is the Birch/Lookout project that's moving forward. Gosh, sorry, I'm trying to think of where we're up to. It's been a little while since I had a meeting on that one. One of the more recent things we did was a couple weeks back, did some community engagement in terms of just, we were at BowFest, we were at the farmer's market on the long weekend, just meeting folks, chatting, introducing the project, what's going on, answering questions. We did produce, and actually I totally forgot about it. We did produce like a 2-pager that sort of had some information about the project on the front and then some frequently asked questions on the back. So maybe what I could do, Steph, is send that around if people are interested, or I don't know if it's worth attaching anywhere, but it's out there. And I believe it's linked on our website, and a lot of the info is on our website as well. So yeah, just updating on the community on the project that's happening. There is a very high level timeline with essentially construction starting later 2025. There's no firm dates yet, but by the end of before the end of 2025, starting construction, and then roughly sometime 2027 having completion, because it's for sure at least I'd say 18 months, and then based on recent experience on Bowen and construction challenges and all of those things, yeah, we'll have to see as we get closer, but that's a rough timeline. So that's something to look forward to. It feels a very long way away now, which is too bad, but it's happening. So what else can I think? I think that's the main thing, really. The last couple of weeks we've been focused on, the last few meetings on that project is the community engagement, and we're just making some high-level redesign on the building in terms of, because the building code has changed. A couple of the requirements, for accessibility or something have changed. So they're just sort of tweaking the plans to meet those new requirements. Is there any questions that I can answer that I haven't sort of covered, or anything specific? No. Okay. So the next one, lot 1 of the community lands, Birch and Tomo. Same thing as I just said. We also were doing, did the community outreach at those same events. So we were talking about both projects and introducing everybody to it and explaining what we were doing. So we've wrapped up the first round of community engagement with the survey and sort of informational meetings and a couple group sessions, and we did a little bit of design work. And so the next phase that we're moving into on that one is kind of, I guess, preparing the draft of what the end report is going to be like. What is it going to look like? Just very high level ideas of what could be on the site, high level maybe pro formas about what that might look like. Mark's bringing his expertise on that. And my big thing that I want to make sure we get in is sort of what are the next steps? How do we take what we've identified and what will it take to then keep this going forward? So what will the needs be in terms of, do we need geotechnical? Do we need a civil engineer? Do we need a survey? Like, what are the things that we need to kind of keep going with this project, and what are the implications of that, costs, those kinds of things? So that's what I'm hoping to kind of work on in the next few months, and then have that report go to council. Any questions on that one, the lot 1 project with Tomo? No. Okay, great. Moving right along. So the last item before we go to that other discussion is other business. I guess that's just a standing one for different things. Yeah, Nigel, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out an idea, which was to create a subcommittee for the Housing Advisory Committee to liaise with the OCP Review Committee. And the reason for that is I feel like this OCP review is going to have a pretty heavy housing focus. And I think there are a lot of moving parts with everything that's going on, sort of new provincial legislation. And I've noticed just in my shorter time working on housing projects on Bowen that in fact our current OCP seems to get in the way of mayor and council's ability to do things. For example, like the cluster housing pilot. We had a lot of support and encouragement from mayor and council, but then when we sat down with Daniel to look at how to set that in motion, ultimately it was mayor and council don't actually have the authority to approve this pilot. You need to do an OCP review. And I would just really love however housing is addressed in the OCP review, that it empowers mayor and council a bit more, because there's so many different sort of housing types, so many different funding streams coming online. And anyways, where I was going with that is I wonder what the group thinks about creating a subcommittee to liaise with the OCP review committee.
Sorry, my headset just died, so I'm switching over.
Okay.
I might throw that to Daniel, or maybe Steph can answer, but like Steph, I imagine we'll be invited at some point to speak with the OCP committee, or they'll reach out. Like, I think there will be them reaching out. So I don't know, is there any usefulness, do you think, in any kind of subcommittee?
Yeah, I think the plan is to be engaging all the committees, the transportation committee, the housing committee, all of those important areas. It's already part of the laid out process to ensure that your excellent views are considered and that you review them.
Okay. Well, then.
We're just in the process of hiring the consultant.
Okay.
That's going to work with that. I'm sitting on the committee. So, and I'm quite sure that one of the questions that will be asked of the housing committee is what areas of the OCP, I mean, in talking with the consultants, proposal people, what's wrong, what doesn't work in the current OCP. So that's just a matter of, one individual sitting down and going through the OCP and saying what doesn't work for housing, and then bringing it back to this committee, and then we could submit it as a report. So
great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Allison. So maybe that's where either, like you say, it could be one person, or that could be a small committee if we wanted to divide and conquer. And certainly Fritz has done a lot of work on that previously. So we have all of his comments. I mean, he's on the committee, I
Yeah.
believe. So, but we do have his documented comments and everything. So I think
Exactly.
it would be a
Yeah.
matter of somebody, reviewing that, reviewing again. Yeah, kind of pulling it all together, which I think I had on my list and hoped to do a while back, and it just didn't get done because I did not have the capacity. But yeah, that's something
Yeah.
we can work on.
I've
Nigel.
got an OCP that I sort of have scribbled notes on as we've been going along over the years, and I've just got to sit down and put them together.
Okay, great. So yeah, Nigel, if you, when it comes, want to head that up. But Daniel, I can see
Sure.
what
I'd love to.
I was just gonna say, I was just looking at our RFPs, what we've like put out, and yeah, we're in the process of trying to hire a consultant. Their first task in our identified steps is like project launch meeting, but then preparing the public engagement plan. That's the first phase is supposed to include targeted engagement with identified stakeholders. The Housing Advisory Committee was on our stakeholder list. But then, yeah, it might be valuable, like if Nigel and others want to form subcommittee to say, let's start the review now, so we don't like sit down to meet and you're sort of like trying to come up with ideas off the top of your head, but like there's some thought given beforehand. That seems worthwhile.
Yeah. Do you have so I guess, yeah, there's no sense of a timeline of that yet, but I'm going to guess, yeah. So if we started now, gave ourselves a few months, I'm going to guess that engagement would be sometime, who knows, beginning of next year or something. It's not going to be next month, I don't think. Or maybe
yeah,
will.
That's what I would think. It wouldn't be next, like given that they're not hired yet.
Yeah, exactly.
And the process is for them to like have a approved plan after they're hired, then yeah, we're a little ways out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well,
So
I volunteer for that one.
Okay, what are we
I can-
calling that? OCP Housing Support Subcommittee?
or just housing review, or does
housing
it
policies or something like
Review of OCP with respect to impacts on housing.
Gotcha.
Okay, and we've got for population, we have Nigel Malkin heading that up.
Kim, I saw your hand go up there. Oh, you have to unmute. Sorry.
You're
Tim?
muted again.
Yeah.
That's a small
There
subcommittee.
I was gonna say, relative to a couple of the comments here, what we really need to do is make sure the OCP isn't limiting what we can. It's not so much like I don't think the OCP should be prescriptive. It should be an enabling document to allow. And we've just established that it is going to allow for the numbers we want. So that's good. Now, maybe we have to get a little more specific about enabling, where some density can go and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Great. So might I suggest, Nigel, because you're keen, why don't you take the lead? And it sounds like Allison, you've got some notes that you can provide. And then
and we've got Fritz's document.
And we've got Fritz's document, so you can read through that. I'm at capacity, so I can't take on too much. But what I could offer is maybe once the work's been done and you kind of have a draft, I'm happy to like go through it with you or help you. And if there's any technical, based on my background, if there's anything technical I can help explain, or I'm sure we could ask Fritz for a quick meeting to explain as well. So if you can lead the charge, I think Allison and I can support. And yeah, okay. Great. Do we have to?
One other comment in looking at the OCP, a number of people have made a comment about it says this, but it's left us to open to interpret what does this mean. So you're still left hanging. So I think identifying a lot of those clauses would probably be useful.
Okay, great. Steph, do we need to do anything formal to create a subcommittee like that, or is it just Okay.
Yeah, to say that the Housing Advisory Committee resolve to strike the Housing Policies Review Subcommittee.
Okay, all in favor? Yeah. Okay, that's unanimous. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Okay.
If anybody wants a hard copy of the OCP, it can be provided. Otherwise, it's online.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would like that so I can do written notes while I'm reading it. So who would I get that from?
Steph?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. And yeah, Nigel, just prompt me if you don't have them. I'll find Fritz's notes and I can send those.
So
okay.
I don't
yeah,
either.
if you could send those over. And Allison, anything you feel like sharing about yours, at least in the housing
I've got to
area?
go back through things.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's going to take me a while to put all my notes into something.
Okay.
Oh,
Well,
yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Agenda, would it? His notes would have been included in an open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
They'll be somewhere, but I think I just have them filed in a folder somewhere. So I'll see if I can just grab them quickly. But yes, they are certainly are somewhere. He's
Okay.
distributed them. Yeah. Okay. Any other new business? Open to anybody? Anything else? Thoughts, comments? Nope. Okay. So we'll move on to, so I don't think there's nothing else. Oh, there is question period, but there's nobody members present. So, okay. Okay, so let's jump back to 5.1, which is the Community-Owned Housing Organization Subcommittee. We have a draft report that was distributed. And I apologize it wasn't distributed earlier. It was a bit of a timeline thing with getting all the various peoples to review and get feedback. So what I might do is maybe, oh, sorry, the first thing I should do, and this is in the report, is make sure to declare that I have a conflict of interest potentially for this. My intention is to present the report, answer any clarifying questions, and then once we're ready, the committee's ready to actually discuss and then make a recommendation or resolution, I'll recuse myself. And to, oh, I should have the report in front of me here. Hang on, to explain the conflict, which I think I wrote in here somewhere. Yes. Just to be clear, because I think everybody knows, I'm the executive director of Birch. I'm do receive a remuneration. It's not a lot, but I do receive remuneration from them. I do receive money from them, and because part of this report is recommending to potentially partner and fund a nonprofit on Island, and Birch would potentially be considered as one of those nonprofits to be funded, that I think it's probably best if I recuse myself from those discussions. Because if it is approved and does go ahead, I would financially gain from that. So that's my plan. I don't know if there's any comments or questions or objections to that. That sounds reasonable. Okay. And then Nigel, I know we did also want to mention, because you volunteer for Birch. So I think we just wanted to put that out there just to make sure that's fully transparent, but he does not get paid at all. So he's just been volunteering with us. So if that's all right with everybody, I'm going to step out when the time comes, and Nigel will chair the meeting and continue the discussion. So let me know if there are any objections to that. But we just wanted to make sure that was all clear up front. So what I might do, I'm going to maybe just open it up. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to read the whole thing. So I wonder if it's worth maybe looking at the first page, just the recommendation, and then maybe I'll open, like we'll look at that together and read it, and then maybe I'll open it for questions, or if anybody does want to say, hey, can we go a little bit more through the report? I can do that as well. So why don't oh, yeah, Allison, go ahead.
Unmute myself here. I would hope you would go through at least the part of the report that justifies or doesn't justify different courses of action.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I mean, I can go through as much as we like. I just didn't want to go over things that maybe people have already gone over in detail. So happy to do that. Let me just get my screens all set up here. So hopefully you can see the screen there. So this is the beginning of the report. So what I did was I tried to follow the format of, like, I looked at a few of Daniel's reports, I think in staff reports. So I tried to follow the format of that. So putting kind of the recommendations right up front, this is what we're thinking, and then sort of the rest of the information to follow. Whereas research on other communities and professional advice on best practices indicate the best option to move forward with the community housing organization is a nonprofit society, and I can go into more details about that. Be it resolved, we recommend council approve in principle to entering a partner agreement with a nonprofit housing organization. Council approve in principle to providing operational funds for a minimum of 3 years to that organization. Council approve in principle to allocate an area of community lands, for example, Area 1 of Lot 1, to the nonprofit society to develop community housing. Council direct staff and the Housing Advisory Committee Working Group to continue to work with outside counsel and others as needed to, and this is where an either or, if it's an existing nonprofit, perform due diligence on the selected nonprofit, or if they choose to establish a new one, to work with all of the legal necessities to establish the new one. Draft a partnering agreement. So that would be where the operational funds come in and the relationship with the municipality. And then council approve expenditures for the above, legal fees and everything, up to a maximum of $5,000. So that's sort of the end ask. And now I'll go into, I won't read everything because I think that's not necessarily needed, but do jump in if you want to. So we went into the purpose of the report, which was that council asked us to create a working group to explore establishing a community-owned housing organization. So we made this working group. A little bit of background, just who was in the group, my declaration of conflict of interest on there. Ron did a great job summarizing sort of some of the research and putting in, these are essentially a lot of it came from notes in the conversation we had with Don Lidstone, who was, and I think we talked about this at another meeting. So he is a lawyer who advised us, and he does a number of these all through British Columbia. So he advised that essentially there are two ways that most municipalities can and do go about developing housing, which is through a nonprofit society or a housing authority. And I think we've discussed before, like Whistler's a good example of a housing authority. There's others around. So what we did was basically break out those two options. So we've got nonprofit society, which hopefully everybody's familiar with what that is. They're a society, a legal society, but they operate for no profit, just to reach their mandate. So the pros, and this was mostly information from Don Lidstone, was that a nonprofit society it's an organization that can be singularly committed to pursuing a housing mandate, unencumbered by the constraints of working within a larger administration. It's arm's length, which allows the society to be agile, nimble, be able to sort of move quickly, be responsive, have some more flexibility. The financial liability to the municipality. This model allows the municipality to be virtually exempt from financial liability. I definitely use that term specifically because it's definitely not zero, but it's the best financial, it's the least amount of financial liability for the municipality is this model. Municipal staff time is reduced because the work is shifted onto the society, and the ability to access. Oh, I think I left this in, and we might be talking that because I think Tim, sorry, apologies. You might have had a comment on that it actually doesn't really make a difference, the debt financing. So sorry, we can address that in a moment. Cons is there is limited control by the municipality. So, the ask is to have the municipality, mayor and council approve, funds from the community that the community wants to use for housing to this society. And by doing this model for the municipality, it does limit their control. And an interesting point that came up in our discussion with Don Lidstone was that is what allows the limitation of liability. So the greater control the municipality has over how the finances are spent, the more liability they have for that. So they're reciprocal. Is that the right word? Anyways, inverse. But the control that they do have is through the partner agreement, which is the thing done right up front. And then, as we've recommended further on, would be a presence on the board. So they would still have a say, they would still be involved, but they wouldn't have the majority and be controlling how the money was spent and operated and what was done. So in summary, this is the current best practice and what most municipalities are doing now. It offers the best finance and liability protection for the municipality, and it's the best method is a partnering agreement to establish responsibilities, mandate, etc., and provide ongoing operational funds. Do we want to pause here? Is there any questions, or do we want me to go on to the next one and then we can kind of compare and ask questions? Okay, I'm going to keep going and then do jump in if there are questions. So the next option is a municipal housing corporation. As I mentioned, Whistler, there's a few other examples. So a corporation is wholly owned by the municipality, possibly reporting directly or indirectly through the chief administrative officer to municipal council. So the pros, the municipality can have more, but still limited control over operations. It's through articles of incorporation, the board makeup, and they can ensure adequate expertise. So essentially, sorry, that's not worded very well. We could probably fix the wording on that one. But essentially, when it's a municipal housing corporation, mayor and council and municipality have a lot more direct say over kind of what's happening. I shouldn't say a ton, but it's more than the society option. And then the cons are that it's controlled by the municipality, can be limiting to the organization. So, the usual bureaucratic processes that we're all familiar with. He flagged potential, political influences as, election cycles happen, staff overturn, there's more influence on what's happening. And there is a greater financial liability to the municipality. Oh, and just as I'd mentioned, it's determined by how much control the municipality has over the corporation. So more control equals more liability. Arm's length and not under control, in reality, it will consume staff time. That was what his comment was. And especially in the setup and startup, it's a lot more time intensive, I think, for staff. So the summary, this has been done by other municipalities in the past, notably Whistler, Tofino, but it's not the current best practice. If pursued, you want to make sure that the municipality feels they have some oversight, but that the organization has freedom to operate and move projects along. So you'd want to find that balance if this was the option to be pursued. So maybe I'll pause there. Those are the sort of two main things we observe, the pros and cons. I can go into sort of the findings and recommendations, but I'm going to pause. And is there any clarifying questions or comments? And I'll just reiterate, we won't get into discussion right now while I'm here. So it's really just clarifying questions about what's in the report. So I might open it up. Anything so far?
So, I guess it just your partnership agreement could be as limiting or as controlling as wanted also. So I'm not sure about the removal of control. I guess my question sort of has to, I'm trying to slide down this document. I guess findings is more, can you scroll up?
Should we go to that?
Yeah. No,
so sorry,
findings.
Findings.
Scroll
Okay.
down. Yeah. The advantages of mandating a standalone housing corporation to achieve the goal. I guess you could have all of those. I guess we're getting into the discussion. Okay, never mind. I'll raise it for the discussion.
Okay. So yes, does anybody else? I didn't see any hands, but do jump in and just speak up if I don't see you. So the findings. So basically what we heard fairly loud and clear from Don was that this is the way pretty much all the municipalities are going now, and he's doing a lot of these. So they're all going to a nonprofit. So the advantages being it's an organization with paid staff who I think Tim's said this before, somebody's waking up in the morning and this is their job. Like that's their focus, is to get this housing built. And maybe it's not you, Tim, sorry, attributing it to you, but that's the idea, is that it's somebody dedicated who's going to be doing that. And full respect to Daniel and his team, not sort of a planner in the municipality who has like 20 things on their plate and is trying to get this other stuff done. That's the advantage of having a separate organization. The board of directors, that brings expertise. So you can have those people on the board to sort of bring that oversight and advisory expertise capacity. It's theoretically an organization free from influence of political and staff changeovers. It can be nimble and responsive without too much bureaucracy, and it does have very limited financial liability to the municipality. Bowen Island Municipality will have support. Oh, so this is just describing what we would recommend, that if the municipality was to go through with a nonprofit society, that we'd recommend, and this is how the municipality would have a supportive, a non-directive role, would be councillor, at least one, sitting as a board member, potentially having a staff member, maybe their non-voting liaison member of the board. It would obviously still have its usual legislative and regulatory authority. So, rezonings, building approvals, all of those kinds of things. They obviously still have that control over things. They would be supportive in providing land and potentially other resources. And then they would provide operational funds through housing related revenues. And we go into that a little more later. MRDT, the Housing Accelerator Fund, other potential sources. So I'll keep going, and again, just jump in if I'm going too fast or skip something. So I tried to, happy to fix the formatting, but I tried to just sort of clear things out because I know it's sort of a long report and there's a lot of bullet points. So I tried to make it clear we have sort of, these are the recommendations for council's consideration. The working group recommends council pursue, and maybe this would get changed to the Housing Advisory Committee. I'm not sure we can figure that out, Steph, with how this gets worded when it moves along up to council. The working group recommends that council pursue direct action in creating a community housing, in the creation of community housing through an independent nonprofit society. So that would be our recommendation. The alternative is that council create a municipal housing authority. So I did want to include that there because, again, sort of that format of how staff reports I've seen. So this is what we recommend, but there, of course, is an alternative. And then should that be approved and move forward, then the decision to be made is, do you create a new society? Do you work with an already established society? We go into a little bit of that here, what the options are. From what Dawn said, the costs are fairly neutral. Neither of them is very costly. Like we have that $5,000 budget. So in terms of actual cash outlay, the due diligence on an existing society, the setup of a new one are similar. Probably the biggest difference is it would take just more time overall and then more staff time from the municipality to create a brand new one, because somebody would have to lead that. Whereas if you partnered with an existing one and they already have capacity, they'd be sort of helping to take leadership on that. But yeah, actual cash outlay and cost wise, it's neutral. So based on this information, the working group recommends that BIM enter into a partner agreement with an established nonprofit society to advance the municipality's housing goals. And actually, I sort of breezed over that, didn't I? I think why, and maybe Tim and Ron could speak a bit more to this. Maybe I'll leave that for the discussion part. But I think why we said is it would be we thought it would be a better option is that the organization up, it's running, it has, infrastructure, resources, it's going, it has, depending on who it is, it has staff, it has volunteers, it already has a board in place. Things would change, obviously, they'd get a review, maybe bylaws updated, they do the partnering agreement, but they're basically already a running concern, if you know what I mean, a going concern. And so you're just sort of partnering with them and going, whereas starting an entirely new society from scratch is just there's just more work, it'll take more time. So that's our recommendation. So I've put there, that's the recommendation, or we've put there to partner with an established one, but the alternative being that the municipality establish a new nonprofit and enter into a partnering agreement with them. And then this basically just repeats the resolution, the recommendation at the front. So that's just a copy and paste there. And then we have the attachments. And what we did for the attachments for this appendix was because we wanted to be able to give everybody more information about kind of, well, what does that look like? What's a budget? What would their mandate be? Like, what are you potentially signing up for? What are you, saying yes to? So this is very much a draft. I cited the sources. It's from a few different places. We got some information from Squamish, who recently formed a nonprofit society. Some of this I took from past reports. I should look at the references here from the affordable housing strategy that was done. There was 2012, there was a report, there was stuff from 2007. We had the housing needs report. Tofino Housing had a good strategic plan, and then Squamish Community Housing had some good information in there. So it's basically just a hodgepodge of stuff I pulled together. It's meant to be an example. It's not meant to be, this is the final at all. It's just meant to give everybody an idea of like, if you say yes, this is what it would look like. And this is pretty much irregardless of whether it's a new society or an established society. These would all, I think, be the same. So that discussion isn't relevant to sort of most of this stuff. If you did want to go, I think also, maybe I said it in here, if it ended up being the housing corporation side, I think this would still be similar. I don't know be exactly the same, but I think, the roles and responsibilities and the mandate would likely be similar anyway. So it's meant to be sort of a generic outline. So we've put in the mandate, pretty obviously, creating community housing. I've included some vision and mission. They're just examples from, I think these are mostly the Birch ones, but just as examples. The purpose, that was from an earlier report from one of the Bowen Island reports a while back, I think. Might be wrong about that. I'm not sure. An example of roles and responsibilities. So, as their responsibility as an organization is to create non-market community housing, a diverse supply, work with the municipality and others, bring in partners, find funding sources, develop and maintain tenant qualifications, tenant selection process, a wait list. Sorry, I skipped over. Work towards the long-term financial stability of the organization. That's an important one. And then act as a community resource for non-market housing. And then in addition, and this is very much would be discussed through the partnering agreement and with staff, is there is an opportunity for such an organization to be a support to the planning department. So supporting staff to develop, monitor, and administer housing agreements and covenants, support staff in discussions with developers during rezoning applications. So, when those rezoning comes up and, hey, how do we meet the affordable housing, inclusionary zoning that we have to do, those kinds of things. Act as a resource for, different things, the housing targets, the housing policy bylaw changes. We're going through a bunch of those now with the OCP change, and support the municipality with these housing needs updates. So, again, not at all a firm list. It's just an idea of where such an organization could help and support the planning department and the municipality. So the different roles that would be there. So this is envisioned as a volunteer board with employed staff. And so our suggestion, or just, an example, I should say, for a board would be 7 to 9 members. It would have 2 members representing the municipality. One would be an elected councillor that would be a voting member, a staff member, non-voting liaison role. And then we would, as mentioned before, look for board members to, who had housing development experience, nonprofit management, and governance experience. Those are, the kinds of people you'd want on the board. Oh, and then we'd envisage that it would be like a working board for the first sort of 1 to 3 years. This sort of 1 to 3 years sort of startup time, let's call it. I don't know. And then it would transition to a governance board model. This just sort of again, these are very high level, who might be there. There might be an administrative assistant or housing assistant, administrator kind of role, with sort of, all of the usual administrative stuff. Behind the scenes, there's bookkeeping, those kinds of things. And just a suggestion of what that might look like in terms of pay. And then executive director, and that could be one person with that role. That actually could be a couple of people. Maybe somebody's the development manager and somebody's more the doing other parts of it. So, I mean, there's obviously, once it's decided to move forward and the partner agreement's beginning and all of that stuff's happening, this can be divided into as many roles as needed, or it could all be folded into one person. So again, just a description of what we see that being. The role, this is just a range of salaries that are offered, and I've seen ones that are even higher, but that's a range of salaries being offered. It could be that you use the municipal pay scale as a reference point, just as somewhere to start. I think we have information about other organizations and their roles for that, that pay scale there. So that's that part. And then, the funding and the budget. So operational funding for the first 1 to 3 years was just what we've proposed. So potential funding funding can come from the Housing Reserve Fund, the Housing Accelerator Fund, and the MRDT. And we could talk, because Tim, I think you had a conversation with CFO, and is it Kirsten or Kristen? You had a conversation?
Kristen, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So do you want to maybe talk about those? I can stop talking. I feel like I've been talking for a really long time.
Well, and Daniel was in on that conversation as well. So we, rather than just putting this basically in our budget as from taxpayer revenue, we have these programs in place already. The housing fund has been around for quite a while. The Housing Accelerator grant came more recently. They would be a logical place to source this, what in effect is startup funding. And then the idea is that as a project is built, then you've got a revenue source, and we can look towards being more self-sufficient. But perhaps continuing to get for example, the MRDT funding.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then part of what's proposed in the budget is that there would be some consultants for the first year, because I think we have some examples from some other societies in different municipalities that they've had, business plans created. They've had, experts come in and help them create plans. So essentially, how do we do this? How do we make sure that this organization becomes, financially sustainable and can achieve things? So again, this is a draft. if all of the resolutions that we've asked or the recommendations we've made for council is approving things in principle. So nothing committed to these numbers. These are draft numbers based on, again, just pulling from a few different places. And yeah, so the idea would be if council approves in principle to move forward with these things, this would be, fleshed out in much more detail and all of that. So I won't go into too much detail unless I might, well, if people have questions, maybe clarifying questions, if you want to ask about this, but if you want to discuss it, I'll leave that for when I go. But yeah, I think otherwise, oh, and then just a very high level work plan for the first couple of years. Again, just a suggestion of how you might, establishing the board and updating bylaws or establishing bylaws, strategic planning, that would be something to do. And then, yeah, figuring out how to sort of actually start to get stuff built. I might also pause, Ron. I don't think I gave you a chance as well to sort of give Tim a little bit of time. Do you have anything you want to add about the report or anything? No? Tim,
No, I
any
think that's very
other?
thorough.
Okay, Tim, any other comments on presenting the information or
No, I think,
facts or?
yeah, I think this is a really good overview, and I'll look forward to the discussion we'll have
Okay.
about any concerns people have or
Great.
support.
Okay. Steph, are you able to have that? Because I'm going to go soon. Are you able to have that up? It's just at the end of the agenda. So if you can share it, yeah. So we'll have that ready for when the discussion starts. I'll just open the floor now. Does anybody have any questions just to clarify the report before I go? Just clarifying questions. Where did this come from? Why did you recommend that? Anything like that? And then hopefully Tim and Ron can answer anything else that comes up throughout the discussion. Anything?
Is there a list somewhere of all the housing organizations that exist in BC?
Ooh.
So you
Not that-
you don't, it's like Squamish is listed, and I mean Tofino's a housing corp and Whistler's a housing corp. But you don't know how many other small communities have these things.
I don't have that information readily available.
We're
no,
relying
Tim.
we're relying on Don Lidstone's input on that because he's worked with a lot of them, and you Robin's included in the report his comments and suggestions, recommendations. It appears that there is the best practice, back in the day, although there weren't many of them when Whistler was created. But the best practice then was a housing corporation. That has clearly shifted over to using societies, and I can go into a few of the reasons for that in the discussion and the example of what happened with.
That wasn't my question. My question was how many small communities under 5,000 population have housing organizations or housing corps?
Yeah, so I don't have that information. And then just also to note, Daniel, if my memory serves, you were also in that discussion with Don Lidstone, right? You and Liam as well. So there you can answer some questions about that discussion as well. Okay, so seeing nothing else, I'm going to sign off. I'm going to hand the reins over to Nigel to chair the discussion. And yes, I will. Oh, maybe just quickly before we do that, Steph, we have a date for the next meeting set? And we don't need to do anything about that?
Friday, October 25th at 9:30 a.m.
Okay, great.
Oh, Allison, Councillor?
Yeah. Oh, you're muted, Allison.
Yeah. Council's been invited.
Yep.
Got me now?
Yeah.
Okay. October 25th is the Howe Sound Forum, which council members usually go to, and our CAO would usually attend. So
okay.
I'm hearing it might be different.
I think, didn't we get a note very recently from Ruth Simon saying that it wasn't on, that it had been canceled?
No, we got a note about the North Shore thing being changed to December, but I'm fairly sure that I haven't seen anything from Ruth canceling it.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can find this.
Okay, why don't I follow up on that offline, and if there's a comment, we can repoll. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Have a good discussion. Bye.
Okay. I just want to start by thanking, Robin and Ron and Tim for putting together this report. It's really dense and really concise, really, really helpful for me to evaluate the opportunity. So let's open it up for discussion.
I'll just say too, I'm happy to share the report on screen if that's helpful for anyone.
Yes,
Anytime,
please.
just let me know and okay. Why don't I'll put it up.
Do we have any particular, this is pretty dense. Do we have any particular areas that anyone would like to discuss?
Yeah. I guess a couple of things, and I don't know if it was clearly talked about, like accessing land in these housing organizations. Was the land just leased to the housing organization? I mean, we're talking about municipal land, right? That's the only land we've got that could contribute. So I've got a little problem transferring direct ownership rather than through the $1 a year type lease for 60 years or whatever. And so when the conversation with Dawn, was the land actually transferred directly and registered as land titles as a ownership, or was it transferred as a $1 a year lease? Because giving away community lands that we actually paid for no money to and not keep the ownership of and the future benefit of to an arm's length entity doesn't sit well with me.
Don was advocating when we talked to him, advocating using essentially, sorry, did I stop sharing?
Wrong screen.
Yeah. Don was advocating for essentially a model that we're following with the 1033 Miller, which is that leasing the land and having a housing agreement bylaw as well.
Yeah.
And that, like, I'll put it back up here when I find the screen. I mean, essentially this recommendation is like allocate land.
Yeah.
An area of community lands, but doesn't speak to how that would be allocated.
Okay.
Just to add a comment to that, I've noticed that a lot of the funding streams that are available for community housing, that kind of aligns with what Daniel's saying, but it's essential that the community housing organization has effective control of the land to even be able to apply.
Yeah, so your long-term lease does that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the long-term benefit stays with the community when you do the long-term lease.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we learned from Don, is that I think he mentioned he's done like 65 of these, over the years. And so it clearly sets out that the separation of sort of who's doing what. So the arm's length housing organization has control, but the municipality maintains ownership, so it doesn't lose the asset. And I know I had been advocating earlier on for transferring the land because that's what we did in Whistler. But this is clearly a better model. So
yeah, well, Whistler's a housing corp and you still control it because you own the shares when you're a municipality, when you
right.
Yeah.
And there are, some issues, and Robin has outlined them well in the report here. The issues that come up is when the municipal staff and council start trying to manage, for example, the way the project is financed, and that increases the municipality's liability, but it also becomes a roadblock, to moving forward. And we had some trouble with that in Whistler.
Yeah. Okay. So, but the other side of the coin is, like right now we're going ahead with a project with Outlook. And there's an agreement and the long-term lease. So all those controls can be set up in the lease agreement and in the, so I don't understand why we would want to spend close to $500,000 over 3 years, when that money to set up an organization and run an independent organization. I mean, how many hours is this person going to work? How many projects are you thinking of doing? I mean, we're small, and 1 or 2 projects on the go at a time is probably all that would ever happen on this island. So why would we not use that money for seed money for getting the construction started, or the bit of money that's needed to match the mortgage funding, the 10% down type of thing? I mean, 450,000 is 10% down on a $4.5 million project. So the numbers don't necessarily cut it for me. And we don't have a lot of money in the Housing Reserve Fund. And I don't know that we'll get much more because of, we're going to have to pre-zone now, and we were getting contributions to the Housing Reserve Fund as amenities. And I don't know whether we're going to be able to do that through the new provincial legislation. So I don't understand why we can't just carry on the way we're carrying on.
Because I'll give you the reason. Look how long it took to get the Lot 3 project going. And the reason is because we didn't have, we had Birch, which was essentially a volunteer society, trying to raise funds, struggling with being able to pay a salary for Robin. Robin's done an incredible amount of work and has been so successful at this. And we need to have an organization that has that responsibility. We're talking about the money coming from the Accelerator Fund and what we already have in the Housing Fund. And we need to have an on-island, dedicated, professional organization that works on this. This doesn't happen. So we were fortunate, or Birch was fortunate, in finding the partnership with Lookout. It's not like you can go out and find off-island entities that are going to make things happen on Bowen. That's why we need our own professional local entity. And
I would add to that. Oh, go ahead, Tim. Sorry.
And we're not talking about this coming out of the municipal budget. We're talking about it coming from these other funding sources.
Okay, but the MRDT is not up and running yet. And how much money do you think it's actually going to generate? And given that we've taken a bunch of properties out of there by opting into the provincial thing, and so that's not going to generate $150,000 a year. Definitely not in the first year. Might do for the second, maybe half of that. And how much money we got in the Housing Reserve Fund? $30,000. And so I don't quite know where you think $150,000 is going to come from in next year's budget.
Daniel, how much money do we have in the Housing Reserve Fund? I think it's more than $30,000.
So, I mean, I will say I did, when I saw Robin shared with me her draft report, I did check with CMHC about if this would be an eligible use of our HAF funding, so the Housing Accelerator Fund, and they confirmed that they have a line item that's like capacity building that supports housing. And so I shared with them the report and said that this is what was proposed at our Housing Advisory Committee level. And they said that would be an eligible use of our HAF funding.
And how much is in that?
We've received the first payment of $413,000, and there's our contribution agreement has up to 3 more payments of 413, so 1.6 total. We have to spend it over the next, and I get confused in my timing. I think it's like 3 or 4 years. So it could conceivably fund, the startup years of it. We do also, I'll just say, like, one of the action plan items in that Housing Accelerator Fund is talking about partnership agreement with nonprofit housing provider leading to. So this would, this is the direction council wants to go, then this would help us achieve one of those action plans, and the funds are eligible.
And what other uses have we got for the funds? I mean, those funds could be used for expanding the Snug Cove sewer.
I mean, that's an eligible use of HAC funding. It's not identified in our action plan as a use. Like in the action plan and the grant submission, essentially we had identified it to support like housing development. So sort of envisioned at the time it was like grant funding for capital projects.
Because that's the other whole problem, is expanding in the cove isn't going to necessarily happen if we don't have extra sewer capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that's quite a ways down the road. Right now, what we need to do, and it's exactly what the Housing Accelerator Fund is for, is we need to get this going. We need to get it moving. And to do that, we have to have people that are going to do it, and people with experience. And that's why we're doing this. And and I guess my challenge with this is we need as a municipality to get out of the way and let them do it, but support them. And that's what we're doing here.
So after the first 3 years and we've run out of housing half funds, then what's going to pay for the carrying on costs?
I have something to offer that I think might help color the conversation. There are a ton of there were a number of funding streams for housing at the provincial and federal level to begin with, but there are a ton of new ones coming online as we see the provincial government and the federal government just working to address the housing crisis. I mean, it will and it's going to take a lot of staff time to evaluate our eligibility for all of those programs and apply for the programs. And we know that they take time because they're coming from bureaucracies. But my take on it is this investment in having dedicated staff in a community housing organization would just the returns from applying for all of the funding that's coming online would far outweigh the investment in staff time. I think this is a great way to get dedicated staff to get this whole project up and running in a meaningful way. I know I've only been on the Housing Advisory Committee for a short time, but my observation so far is that so much opportunity seems to get bogged down in bureaucracy, and we're losing people. I've lost a couple more friends from Bowen this year because things just aren't happening fast enough. And I think it's of critical importance that we just take action. And I think when I look at that investment, if you were to build a home with it, it would build a tiny little apartment somewhere on Bowen. Whereas if you create a team that is completely focused on creating a volume of community housing on our island, I think the dividends will be far greater just creating that dedicated team.
Greg's got his hand up.
I think you're still on mute. We can't hear you.
Yeah, you're muted, Greg.
Well,
there we go.
We still can't hear you.
Still can't hear you.
Take your earphones out. Maybe it's can't hear you. You've got earphones in. Do you want to take those out and see?
Yeah,
there we go.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Technology, eh? I echo Nigel's comments about I've sat for, I guess, almost 2 years now, and experiencing the frustration in seeing and witnessing the amount of paper, the bureaucracy and meetings that goes on through all of the processes, and so I share that frustration, or having witnessed it. I guess I understand the need, and I understand how things work, and I understand how bureaucracies work. But we are in a time of transition, of change, of challenges that we didn't have when OCPs were written in the day. So I agree with a lot of what has been said about needing to take action, needing to put new things in place, and needing to create entities that are specific to the task at hand. Because goodness knows that the municipality and Daniel's staff have enough on their plate. So I support these kinds of recommendations. One of the questions I had was, what does approval in principle mean versus how does that? That sounds like another stuff. Why can't we approve this and make it happen? Or what does approval in principle mean? And does that mean that there's further discussions to refine this before it becomes an entity?
I can answer that, Greg. Approval in principle here means that we can proceed with Don Lidstone to create a partnering agreement, which is what he identified was what we needed to do to make that. That is the document that spells out everything in terms of the relationship between the municipality and the society, which is what this is all about. And to my higher level goal, what it does is it will be created so that the municipality can support what the society is doing with the means that they have, without having to get into discussions like this over every little thing. It's just very clear. You're delegating and you're saying, here's what we can do. We can help provide land. We can give you a little bit of startup funding, but if that's not long-term funding, the organization's going to have to figure that out. And Nigel gave us some good examples there. So this really is just getting the $5,000 is just to get this partnering agreement done.
Thank you, Councillor Wake. I just want to acknowledge we're bumping up against 11. Is everyone here okay to go a little over?
I've got another meeting at 11:30, but
yeah.
I'm just going to say hard stop at 11:20 to give my Zoom a chance to do its conversion before we start the 11 meeting, if that's okay.
Okay.
Is the task before us now to vote on whether we want this presented to council for tentative approval, or for is there?
Yeah, we'll want to vote on a recommendation. I've got it up. If you guys, when you're ready, we can wordsmith it to your satisfaction.
Okay.
I don't know if you're there yet.
Are we ready?
well, there's two questions. One is approve in principle allocating the community lands. Area 1, Lot 1. Excuse me, I get this awful frog in my voice in the morning. I thought that's why we issued that expression of interest and why we are involved with Tomo, that they were going to be the ones to work with Birch to carry forward and actually build the development. So I don't know why we need to throw an intermediary in there if Tomo's the one that was going to build it. Anyhow,
I don't think Tomo is going to build it. What they're doing is creating a phased development plan. It's a high-level plan. What we need is a mechanism, a mechanism to make this actually happen.
okay.
And that's why we need, sorry, this is
Okay. And I guess why not just continue with working with Outlook to do further development?
It's Lookout, and
I'm sorry, Lookout. Yeah, I keep wanting to call them Outlook. The software computer program.
Yeah, and that's there's already concern on the island that they're not from on island, they're not here, and we've had some comments that are they going to be letting people from the downtown east side going to come and live in this housing? And it's ridiculous. The agreement is set up so that can't happen. But Lookout and organizations like it are not Bowen based. They're based in other communities, and I think we were very fortunate Birch was very fortunate to get this partnership. I don't think we can rely on that in the future. And certainly we don't want everything to take as long as that one has taken.
So I guess the other is just when you're applying for grants, it looked in the process Lot 3 that all the grantors were looking for an experienced organization that had a proven track record of providing housing.
Right. And as soon as we get a project done, then we've got a foot in the door for that. So,
but are you not going to have to go with a lookout or a catalyst in order to get that foot in the door? So why put in an extra level of bureaucracy?
We're actually taking out an extra level of bureaucracy.
Okay. And I think you've got to change the resolution 4, because council directs staff in the housing advisory coho working group. If your idea is to have Birch be one of the applicants, I don't think the working group can be the one.
Okay, are we wordsmithing then, or? Are we
Well,
there yet?
I'm just saying, maybe you just, I just not sure whether it should just, yeah.
Well, so
you can't have the coho working group because Robin's part of the coho working group.
okay, I think you're misunderstanding what's happening here. What we're going to do is have BIM and Birch together working with Don Lidstone to work out the partnering agreement.
Then you've got to say that in the agreement that because you're talking about perform due diligence on the selected established nonprofit or establish a new nonprofit society.
Okay, so on the perform due diligence side, that part will be done by Lidstone. That won't be work that, they will be, Robin and Birch will be involved in terms of providing information, but doing the diligence will be Lidstone's job. That's part of what the $5,000 is for.
Okay, so if your intent is that council direct staff to engage, to prepare a partnership agreement with Birch, then say so. This is wording is leaving it back to making a choice, looking at a selected nonprofit. I'm reading brackets and little a 4A.
Okay,
I think what is being suggested here is maybe that should be council's decision, whether or not we and based on advice from Lidstone, whether or not we should proceed with Birch or start a whole new nonprofit. I don't think there's any question on this. Why would we go out and start from scratch and spend another 5 years when we've got a very capable group of people? The board of Birch is excellent, and we're going to have now municipal participation on that board. That's all part of this partnering agreement. So I think that decision is obvious, and I'm hoping when it comes to council, we can actually have that discussion at the council table and make that decision, and then proceed with drafting the partnering agreement.
Well, then you're asking your clause 4 has to be reworded.
okay.
Okay, well, how would you reword it, Allison?
Well, I think you just that if you want to ask them to look at to send out an EOI for societies who are interested, or to have the discussion. I mean, do you want to just say to use a council direct staff to work with outside counsel and others as needed to perform due diligence on Birch and draft a partnership agreement with Birch? I mean, if that's the recommendation, or is the recommendation that you go and do a further study on whether you go with an existing group or create a new one? So there's two actions in this one resolution.
And Nigel Daniel's got his hand up.
Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
I was just gonna say, I think I agree that if the Housing Advisory Committee like has a recommendation, if you have a preference to say what we think we should do is partner with Birch, then I would say that in the first clause. And then in the fourth clause again, say, direct staff work with legal counsel to perform due diligence and draft a partnering agreement, and or like work with Birch to draft a partnering agreement, report back to council. And then it's like when this is presented to council, make it clear that like this is the report had choices for how to proceed, but the Housing Advisory Committee reviewed and is recommending to do this because it's the simplest. So making clear to council, like there's still a choice there for council, but the Housing Advisory Committee has a preference and is recommending a preference. And I guess, yeah, and I guess my other one would be number 4. It's like Lidstone is our legal counsel, so we don't need to say outside.
Good point. And I was going to make the same point. Like we should be making I think Robin's being very careful here not to presume anything, but
yeah.
She's presented all this information, and I think the decision in front of us right now, like in the next 5 minutes, is that we recommend that Birch be the partner.
So then you change resolution 1 to say council approve in principle entering into a partnership agreement with Birch.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, here, we're doing it.
Have you got it up on the screen?
Yes.
Isn't it on the screen?
Okay.
It
Yeah,
is.
sorry, I wasn't looking. I was looking at the hard copy. Okay. With a nonprofit.
Oh,
With Birch. Yeah.
colon.
With Birch, a nonprofit. Put Birch in front.
Okay.
After with, put Birch.
Okay.
Now I would say a nonprofit housing society.
Yeah, now and then put comma, a nonprofit housing society. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, 2 can stay the way it is. And then 3 is council approve in principle allocating
A portion of
no, well, you can just
all
say
the community lands.
some of the community lands, or a portion of the community lands.
To Birch.
No, I mean it's
Oh, here to the nonprofit society. So
well, no, it is Birch, but that's after that's sort of a 3 should be maybe after through the partnership agreement.
after the brackets.
Yeah, well, through the partnership agreement to Birch.
With Birch.
Yeah.
Get rid of the nonprofit society.
Yeah, because you've got Birch up above. But
Would it be allocating via lease?
but yeah, allocating via long-term lease.
Allocating via
No, up top. The council proven principle allocating through a long-term lease. A portion of the community lands. Yeah, we don't need the partnership. You see, 3 should come after 4.
okay.
Because the partnership agreement is going to be developed in 4.
Okay. Is everyone okay with that move so far, Friendly and Mindy?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Oops.
So council directs, okay, so 3 now reads, okay, 4, renumbered 4. Go back up. We got to play with 4. So council directs staff to work with BIM legal counsel, Lidstone, I don't know what, and others as needed.
But is it Daniel going to
Yeah, who are the
or is
others?
it Tim and Robin?
No, well, you've got two actions. A is to perform due diligence on the selected established nonprofit. So, okay, get rid of and others as needed.
Okay.
Because if you need, staff will, yeah. To A, perform due diligence on selected established nonprofit, and B, and get rid of or establish. And B, draft a partnering agreement with Birch.
Okay. I'm gonna take this out.
Yeah,
We can
take that out, yeah. And report back to council. And I guess you could say, yeah, no, it's leaving, okay. And then council approve in principle allocating through a long-term lease a portion of the community lands through a partnership agreement. Yeah, so I don't know, I guess, yeah. Do you want to change Birch in 4 to selected
But
nonprofit?
why are we beating around the bush on this? We
Yeah, I
want
think
Birch to.
Well, we've got Birch up front, but Daniel's also saying he doesn't want council, well, he can, I guess in the introduction to this can say, this is the housing's recommendation, but if council wants to do a EOI for others, then or, discuss, yeah, okay.
Okay, so leave it.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, so what are we're changing this Birch to?
No, yeah, no, that's it. Leave it with Birch. Council approve in principle. And Tim, were you saying that A should be perform due diligence on Birch? Or just leave it with, I like it to leave, I think we just leave that with a selected established nonprofit. Yeah.
Because that's giving council the choice to.
Yeah, I think we leave that and then draft. Yeah, okay. Report back to council approve in principle allocating through a long-term lease a portion of the community lands through a partnership agreement with Birch. We don't need the partnership agreement because we've drafted that up above. So council approve in principle allocating through a long-term lease a portion of the community lands to Birch to develop community housing.
Is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Kind of speeding along here, Allison. We need to get a little bit more.
I know. Okay. And then council, okay, then we're fine. You've got it.
Great.
I'm a little
any more discussion before we make a motion?
Yeah, there's the Housing Advisory Committee and the COHO Working Group.
That's out. It's just council direct staff.
Okay. Okay.
You need staff in, yeah.
Oh.
Direct staff to work.
The word, thank you.
Okay.
Are we good with this?
I think Nigel, you got to see if there's some discussion. We've got
Yeah,
some
any discussion? Any further discussion? Okay, can I get someone to move this? Greg, second? Am I allowed to second it? Okay, Tim. Tim second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Someone voting?
Any opposed?
I'm still not convinced that this is the way to go. So, but if you're going to do it, I've got the right wording in the resolution.
Okay. Well, noted Councillor Morse is opposed, but I believe the motion carries. Is that right, Steph?
Yeah, it carries.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you everyone for going over. Anything further to discuss before we adjourn?
There are a couple of actions in here that will come in the minutes, and we may be reconsidering that over October 25th date. So look forward to an email from you on that.
Great.
The last email I've got from Ruth was last week, and it was giving us the agenda and everything. So I think October 25th is on.
Look at that in email. Thank you so much, Nigel, for stepping into chair.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Meeting adjourned.
Have a great day. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Nigel.